In the last video, I gave you a bit of insight into my pre-project planning process using tools like Claude and ChatGPT and V0 to get me to the point where I can actually start building what it is that I want to build. As a reminder, up until about 12 weeks ago, I'd never written a single line of code, and I certainly wouldn't consider myself even now to be a developer. But I've been able to go on this journey because of the amazing tools that are now available. And I was thinking about how can I be most helpful in this next video for anyone that's going on this journey that is also not a developer. Having me frantically clicking around Cursor, which is the development platform that I'm using, is probably not very helpful. But what I will show you is a little bit of how I'm using a project guide, a project document to keep myself organized. So for anyone that goes on this journey of building out their first AI project, you might be using a tool like Cursor, which is an AI-powered development tool that is going to help write a lot of the code. You might be using a framework like NextJS, which is going to hold your project and all of the files and the API routes that you're building. Now, I've been on an exciting, frantic journey of learning so many of these different terms and how to actually structure this project that I found it quite difficult to keep on top of what it is that I've done. And you'll hear this a lot when you're following people that are going on this similar journey, that as you're using AI, you think you're fixing one thing, and then you've accidentally broken something on the other side, but you're not sure why. And now you've got to go back over here and try and remember what it is that you are building and why you or AI wrote it in that way. And so you can very easily feel like you're going around in circles. And so one of the ways that I've tried to bring the raw sort of code and the files and the folders into my own language is to create a kind of governing project guide document. And this is just a template. I've taken a clone of my actual one so that you can see how I've structured it. So firstly, I've got a page where just in my own language, I'm writing about the different flows that a user would go through. So what is it that they're going to do as they sign up to our application? What is it that they're going to do as they upgrade? And in my example, it's all about creating buying processes and creating projects and inviting colleagues and so on. So for each of these, I'm explaining to myself, not to anyone else, but just to myself, someone's going to come to the homepage, they're going to click on this button, then we're using Clark as authentication. There's going to be a webhook, and that's going to send that back to our application. It's going to provide these details. Then the user is going to be passed onto this page. So when we're looking at the project, and there's all these different pages and routes and everything like that, it can be difficult a few weeks down the line to remember what it is that you built. And so this really helps me to understand the flow that a user is going through. The next dimension is the actual pages that I've built. Now, within the project, depending on how you're creating these pages, you've probably got a lot of actual pages, but then a lot of different components that are either being used by one or more pages. So these could be little text input components or little modals that you're creating. And it can be really difficult 2 or 3 weeks later to come back and go, what on earth are all these things doing? And why did I write them? Why did I build them? What do they connect to? And so for each of the core pages of my application, which might be a dashboard, it might be a settings page, it might be a billings page, I've written down what is the page, what's it supposed to do, and then what are the components or modals that are feeding into this page, and what API routes is it calling? And so that can just help me to understand, all right, this is what I built, this is what it's supposed to do, and this is what it connects up to. So I'll have a whole list of all of those pages. Next up, the API routes. So again, I've created literally hundreds, and not hundreds, but nearly hundreds of different API routes that are calling out to different things like Stripe for billing, calling out to Supabase to get information or update information in the database, calling out to Clark for authentication. And so depending on all these different use cases, these routes are being written up with different methods. And again, 2 weeks later, you come back, you're like, I can't even understand what this thing was supposed to do. And yes, you've commented in that code. And so on a page by page basis, you should be able to see what each section of that code is supposed to do. But just at a high level, I've got all of these API routes and I want to understand what each of them does, which pages are calling that route, and it just helps me to understand. So that's about the core sort of application and how I'm helping my future self by documenting a little bit about what these things do. And then for each different part of the technical stack that I'm using, I've got a simple page. Now, I've pulled out all of the information from my project out of here, but just so you can see, so V0 is the tool that I'm using for UI design. Quick link to the docs, and then an explanation, what does it do? And then any important functions, hooks, or properties. So in V0, I've set up a project and I've given it various prompts and various system background to help me. So I'd have that in here. Cursor, which is what I'm using for my development environment. Again, a reminder, what does it do? How am I using it? Have I put in anything specific? In Cursor, for example, you create a Cursor rules file to advise the AI on what it is that you're trying to build. So making sure that I can remind myself of that. Vercel, their AI SDK, which I'm using for integration into the LLM platforms. Again, a reminder, what does it do? And any important functions like use chat or generate text that we're using in that. Clark for authentication, Stripe for billing, Supabase for the database, Vercel for hosting with any environment variables, and then GitHub as well for that code management across different environments. And so in my actual document, each of these pages is filled out with loads of supporting information that helps me. And it just means that at the start of the weekend, which is when I'm building all of this stuff, I can quickly just dive around and remind myself of where I left off, what it was that I was doing, how all of these things plug together. And it really brings that code to life for me as a non-developer developer. So I hope that's helpful. I'll actually create a public URL for this guide, and feel free to copy it, and hope it helps you if you also are a non-developer developer going on this journey.